The Book of Giants, the Dead Sea Scroll they don't teach. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Picture 1947. A Bedouin shepherd tosses a rock into a cave in the Judean desert. You hear a crack as pottery shatters. And that single sound breaks open 2,000 years of absolute silence. We've all heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The pristine biblical manuscripts that totally electrified the world. But hidden in the dark, among thousands of fragments, scholars pulled out something completely unconventional, something that almost never makes it into Sunday school or mainstream academic discussions. We're talking about an ancient, fragmented mystery called the Book of Giants.
To kick things off, I want you to visualize this incredible, visceral scene from the ancient world. Two enormous figures, literally monsters, wake from sleep at the exact same moment. Their names are Ahia and Hahia. They wake up screaming, or honestly, maybe they're just so terrified no sound comes out at all. They look at each other across the dark and realize with absolute dread that they've just had the exact same prophetic nightmare. It's such a cinematic opening to a text that takes ancient mythology and completely flips it on its head. The Qumran Caves, 1947. So, to really get why this text is so shocking, we have to look at exactly where it was found. The Qumran Caves weren't just random holes in the wall. They were the library of an ascetic Jewish sect called the Essenes, and they had a massive collection of literature. Right alongside your standard, pristine Hebrew Book of Isaiah, they kept hymns, community rules, and all this Second Temple literature. Nestled right there among the foundational texts of major world religions was the Book of Giants. 7. Now let's be super clear about something. This wasn't some fringe, weird document sitting forgotten in a dusty corner. Scholars identified up to 7 separate manuscript copies of this text in Cave 4 alone. 7! You absolutely do not copy a text 7 times by hand in the ancient world unless it really, really matters to you. This text was read, studied, and deeply cherished by that Qumran community.
The Watchers and the Nephilim. Okay, to really grasp what we're looking at here, we need a quick refresher on the lore. The Book of Giants is essentially a companion piece to the famous Book of Enoch, and it builds on this wild foundational myth. The Watchers, which were a group of 200 divine beings, or fallen angels, decide to come down to Earth and take human wives. The offspring of these unions? The Nephilim. Enormous, violent, insatiable giants. Basically, they are the ultimate villains, the undisputed monsters of the pre-flood world. Let's trace how this pre-flood era timeline completely spirals out of control. First, year 0, the Watchers descend and shatter the boundary between heaven and earth. Then, decades later, the Nephilim are born. As they grow up, their hunger just becomes boundless. By the time we hit the centuries mark, the earth is utterly ravaged. They eat all the human food, then they eat the humans, the animals, and eventually they start eating each other. It's a total bloodbath. And God prepares the Great Flood as an act of pure justice. But then, right in the final days, the text drops a massive twist on us. These mindless, brutal monsters begin to dream. The prophetic nightmares. And look, these aren't just your standard bad dreams. The fragments we have outline some incredibly specific, haunting visions. The giants dream of cosmic fire. They see this massive garden being completely submerged underwater. They watch tablets being inscribed with their horrific deeds, and an angel descending from heaven with a literal sword. Now, in the ancient world, prophetic dreams meant one thing: God was talking to you. The giants are terrified. Instead of just going on another rampage, they actually call an assembly. They debate. They desperately try to reason their way to some kind of meaning. The quest for interpretation. So the crucial point is how these giants react. They don't act like mindless beasts at all. They act like beings desperately seeking the truth. They realize pretty quickly they can't interpret these divine visions on their own, so they pick a giant named Mehewe to be their messenger. Mehewe actually travels vast distances across the world, specifically seeking out the one human who has seen the machinery of heaven and can actually interpret its language. He goes to find Enoch. Mawe finally finds Enoch out at the very edge of the earth, and the interpretation Enoch gives him is just devastating. The fire? That's judgment. The submerged garden? That's the coming flood. The sword is completely real. Enoch basically delivers the answer they already feared. Everything ends. There's no appeal process, there's no mercy for what they are, and their fallen fathers are going to be imprisoned. And honestly, the most heartbreaking part of all this? When Mawe brings this news back to the giants, Ogia doesn't react with rage. He reacts with recognition. Deep down, even the monsters knew what was coming.
This brings us to such a brilliant pivot when we compare the Book of Enoch with the Book of Giants. See, the Book of Enoch treats the giants as nothing more than a problem that needs a solution. They're just mindless vectors of contamination, which makes the flood a really clean, straightforward act of pure justice. But the Book of Giants radically shifts the camera inside their heads. By giving the giants dreams, fear, and this desperate search for understanding, it grants them a tragic inner life. It takes clean justice and turns it into very complex, uncomfortable justice.
Which leads us right to this profound theological question. Can you be guilty of what you are rather than what you actually chose? Just think about it for a second. The Nephilim didn't ask to be born. They didn't choose who their fathers were. They were born into a condemned existence, carrying the weight of a crime that happened before they even existed. Now, the text doesn't excuse their extreme violence, not at all, but it forces us to sit inside the nightmare with them and really wonder about the fairness of inherited guilt.
Gilgamesh. And then, just when you think you've got a handle on this text, scholar Joseph Mielik uncovers a massive plot twist back in 1976. Hidden right there in the fragments of this Jewish apocalyptic text is a name you're probably going to recognize. Gilgamesh. Yeah, that Gilgamesh. The heroic king of Uruk, the guy who fought monsters and searched for immortality in ancient Mesopotamian lore, he actually appears in the Book of Giants as one of the doomed, condemned Nephilim. Crazy, right? Scholars are literally still fiercely debating what Gilgamesh is even doing here. Let's break down the two main theories. Theory 1 is absorbed lore. Gilgamesh is described as 2/3 divine in his own myths, so maybe Jewish authors just casually absorbed him as a really famous example of a giant. Easy enough. Theory 2, though, is intentional polemic. This argument says that Jewish authors living in Babylon deliberately took the absolute greatest hero of their cultural rivals and completely rewrote him as a doomed villain. But you know what the beautiful irony is here? Even as a supposed villain, the text still shows Gilgamesh standing in that assembly, dreaming, weeping, and desperately seeking meaning. Why was this text sidelined? Given how rich and just incredible this story is, we really have to ask that. Why did Rabbinic Judaism and later early Christianity leave the Book of Giants completely out of their official canons? Why was a text that was clearly cherished by the Essenes essentially stranded in the dustbin of history? Now, what's really interesting is the danger of sympathy. Giving the Nephilim prophetic dreams strongly implies that God was actually communicating with them. Giving them an interior life creates empathy. And the very moment you start feeling sympathy for the monsters, the clean, righteous justice of the biblical flood starts to look, well, uncomfortably messy. It raises huge questions about divine justice that the official traditions probably just prefer to keep firmly closed. Saved by the Silk Road. Amazingly, the story doesn't end in the Judean desert. After being totally left out of the mainstream Western tradition, the Book of Giants experienced this astonishing second act. It was essentially saved by the Silk Road. It was rescued from total obscurity by an entirely different ancient faith that physically carried it to the other side of the world. Enter Manichaeism. Founded in the 3rd century CE by the Persian prophet Mani, this was a radically dualistic religion. Mani's whole theological system was built entirely around a cosmic war between divine spirit and dark earthly matter. So for Mani, this story of heavenly watchers coming down to produce fleshy, monstrous offspring, that was literally the perfect mythological expression of divine spirit being contaminated by dirty, gross matter. So Mani basically adopted the Book of Giants, and its unlikely survival journey is nothing short of incredible. In the 3rd century, Mani preserves it and adopts it. Over the next few centuries, his followers translate it into Parthian, Coptic, Chinese. They carry it across Persia, deep into the Roman Empire, and all along the Silk Road into Central Asia. Fast forward to the early 20th century, and German archaeologists actually unearthed these Manichaean fragments in the Turfan Oasis in China. It survived precisely because a completely different culture found it deeply meaningful. Reconstructing the ruins. Today, scholars like Lauren Stuckenbrook are facing a massive puzzle trying to piece this together. They're literally working with burnt edges, half sentences, and all these altered Manichaean versions. But you know the most agonizing part of the whole thing? The final ending of the story remains forever lost. We know Enoch tells them they're doomed, for sure, but the fragments go completely dead silent on how Oya and Haya actually reacted in the dark after hearing their fate. Did they rage against the heavens? Did they just quietly submit? We are literally never going to know. Let's move to our final thought and see how this builds to an incredibly haunting takeaway. What does it actually mean to dream of your own destruction and ask for the truth anyway? Look, these were monsters. They were born into a condemned nature, locked in a world that fundamentally couldn't contain them. Yet, when faced with terrifying apocalyptic visions of their own end, they didn't just blindly destroy everything. They reached across the world for meaning. In their desperate search for truth, even knowing the answer was absolute ruin, they showed a tragic, beautiful kind of humanity that somehow survived against all odds. And honestly, that is really something to think about.